Greetings, humans. This is a very exciting week. The book that Annalise and I have been working on for months, Jubilant, has finally been published and arrived, and it is a brick. I knew that it was over 700 pages long, of course, because I did all the formatting and typesetting, but it's one thing to have that number in your head and another thing to actually feel in your hands the book that we wrote. And it's a chunk. I am so excited that copies of this are finally here. It looks exactly how I imagined, which is good given that I did all of the prep work for it, but it's real. It's real and it's here and it's so exciting. So in celebration of this book finally arriving, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of just some fun background information about the writing of the book, and then also read a section out loud for you. The characters of Jubilant, Wren and Kelta, have existed for exactly 8 years. The date of their first appearance was November 26, 2013. The place, 2 separate houses on opposite sides of the country. Annalise and I were both on Thanksgiving break, and we were conversing idly via Google Chat when the following conversation launched an entire series of books. Of course, the original conversation was text only, but for your viewing pleasure, I've decided to recreate the conversation for you. Right. My brain is excessively full of ships at present. I finally got hold of a copy of Master and Commander, and it's rather a delightful read thus far. Let's have some ships.
Yes, let's. How would you like your ships to come about?
Oh, I'm not terribly particular. Come about 3 points to larboard, that should do it.
Aye, sir. We're cutting it awfully close to the rocks, sir.
Indeed. Carry on.
Aye, sir. Kelta glances sidelong to the second mate.
Wren Elspur smiled lazily at the exchange of looks. Half his crew was new, taken on at last port after that nasty business with the Paravian man-of-war. But they'd come round. Another point larboard after we passed the rock, he said.
Kelta exhaled a little. She had sailed too long with Wren to consciously doubt him, but every so often he could still get her blood pressure up.
We went from there, coming up with increasingly dramatic plot points in an attempt to out-chaos each other. And over the course of the next 5 days, we wrote an entire novel's worth of material. We later realized that the book we'd accidentally written that week was actually the 6th book in a series. So we went back and started filling in the blanks. 8 years later, to the day, we finally have the first book of the series published. And we are both giddy with excitement to share Wren and Kelta's story with you at last. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a dramatic reading of a section from chapter 1. I hope you enjoy their story, and if you want to read more of it, the link to the Amazon page is down in the description, where you can get a Kindle copy or this hard copy brick. Chapter 1. Pistol fire flashed through the mist, and Kelta's lucky stone flared hot against her throat, warning her. She leapt aside and heard the guns report at the same instant that she felt pain flare along the side of her neck. She stumbled, tripped over a dead body, and fell to the deck. The boards under her back were slick with her crewmate's blood. Several more shots rang out, but they didn't echo off the water. The mist deadened the sound. Then silence fell. The fight had only lasted seconds. Kelta hadn't even had time to draw her swords. There was no noise but the creak of the rigging overhead and the swish of water against the hull. Kelta held her breath. "Is that all of them?" asked a harsh voice, no more than 2 paces away. Kelta tensed but didn't move. The man's accent sounded Alakite, but he spoke the Viseni trade language. "That was the last one," another voice replied. "We did it. We actually got them all. Damn Taxians aren't so impressive when you catch them half asleep, are they? What the hell are they doing this far north anyway?" He also spoke Viseni, but with a soft Paravian accent that sent a shiver down Kelta's back. She felt blood trickling from her neck where the pirate's bullet had grazed her, but it wasn't spurting. It wouldn't kill her. She could still fight. She was close enough to reach those two speakers before they knew what was happening. She could leap up, draw her swords, and die in a hail of bullets as the other pirates surrounded her. So she lay still with her eyes shut and focused on keeping her breathing slow and silent while her mind raced. She should have known the pirates had surrendered too easily. They had attacked out of the mist shortly after nightfall and realized too late that their target was a Taxian warship. Their abrupt surrender in the face of overwhelming odds would have made sense, except that half their crew was Paravian. Kelta, of all people, knew how sly and conniving Paravians could be. Of course it had been a false surrender. Of course they had a plan to retake their vessel. But how had they done it? 10 experienced Taxian warriors didn't simply nod off all at the same time in the middle of their duties, even if they'd been awake all night after a battle. Somehow the pirates had drugged them. The water, the barrel on deck, the barrel Kelta's crew had been drinking from since they captured the pirate ship. The pirates must have drugged it before they surrendered. Kelta had been too focused on steering through the fog to drink, and that had saved her life. But if a Taxian warrior ought to know anything, it was how to use her enemy's weapon against them, and Kelta had survived this long by doing just that. For the moment, she had to assume she was the only survivor. Facing a score of enemies alone would be fatally stupid. The teardrop of black stone on her necklace still felt hot against her skin, still warning her of danger. Not that she needed the lucky stone to tell her that. She could hear the pirates talking around her. She could feel the vibration of their footsteps through the boards of the deck. Kelta hunched her shoulder against the side of her neck, trying to staunch the blood without moving too much. She listened, hardly daring to breathe, as the pirates strode past her, laughing and jeering at their success. They had broken out of the hold, found weapons, and brought down 10 Taxian warriors so fast that Kelta barely knew what had happened. That was a notable accomplishment. But now they were too busy congratulating each other to bother checking the bodies, and that too was fatally stupid. They moved away from Kelta, and she heard a few of them shouting orders to adjust the ship's course. The thick mist rolling across the deck muffled their voices, but Kelta concentrated on the vibrations in the planks under her back, tracking the men's footsteps as well as she could. One moved behind her, to the wheel she'd abandoned. Some went below, and what felt like 3 sets of footsteps climbed into the rigging. Eventually, silence fell. The man Kelta had tripped over lay beside her, obviously dead, with his eyes staring blankly. But most of her crew had fallen several yards away. Some of them might still be alive. If they were, the fog muffled any sounds of breathing or moaning. Kelta waited a little longer, counting 30 slow, careful breaths to be sure she was alone, then drew the small knife sheathed against her forearm and reached low across her stomach to cut a strip of cloth from her opposite sleeve. The motions were awkward, trying to hold tension in the fabric to cut it without moving too much, and her braided hair pressed irritatingly into her spine as she lay on top of the thick plate. But she didn't sit up. The pirates might see that, despite the early morning darkness and the mist. And besides, she didn't want to risk disturbing the wound in her neck. It might not seem bad right now, but if she moved too suddenly, it could start bleeding more heavily. She moved her hands up to her neck, pressing the piece of her sleeve against the wound. She let out a soft breath of relief as the blood failed to seep through the wad of cloth. It really wasn't too bad. Kelta cut a longer strip of cloth from the hem of her tunic, still keeping her motions slow and quiet in case any of the pirates looked in her direction, and wrapped it around her neck, trying to pull it tight enough to stop the bleeding without constricting her breathing. It felt clumsy and bulky. The Keltorax's surgeon would do a better job when she got back to the larger ship. For now, Kelta would settle for not bleeding to death before she had a chance to win back their prize. Kelta slipped her wrist knife back into its sheath and rolled carefully onto her stomach, trying to listen for approaching pirates at the same time that she tested her body's movement. Lifting her head sent a twinge of pain down her neck, but she didn't feel dizzy or weak. Good. That meant she wouldn't have to waste time trying to hide and recover her strength. She watched the helmsman for a moment, waiting for a particularly thick band of fog to cross the deck between his lantern and her position. Then she pushed to her feet and moved to the rail, scrambling up into the shrouds before the mist parted again. She clung there, listening and staring around, her neck throbbing with every heartbeat. Nobody shouted the alarm or ran toward her. No sudden weakness came over her after her rush of movement. She still had a chance. It was a slim chance. She and Callan, the fighting master's mate, had counted the pirates when they locked them below. 21 men, and she had to assume they were all armed now. If she wanted to live, she'd have to kill every single one of them. As she leaned her face against the wet rat lines in front of her, she felt the clear focus of combat settling over her body. The world beyond the schooner disappeared from her mind, as if the mist had seeped inside her, leaving her with only one thought: 21. Kelta clung there for another moment, listening to the ship, then set to climbing. She had heard 3 men approach the rigging near her. Those 3 were now isolated, even from each other, by a fog-laden tangle of lines and sails. No one would notice them missing for a while. So she hunted the 3 pirates through the rigging. She moved carefully across the slick ropes and yards, aware of the slight weakness in her left shoulder near her wound, and aware that the pirates were probably more nimble in the rigging than she was. She'd only been at sea 3 years. All the pirates were probably better sailors than Kelta, but none of them were better killers. You can read the rest of the first chapter on my website, galadrielcoffeen.com, which is linked down in the description. Or, of course, like I mentioned before, you can run over to Amazon and get yourself a copy of the whole book. I hope you enjoy reading about Wren and Kelta's adventures as much as Annalise and I enjoyed writing them. Stick around for more details about the book, more readings, more costume making, and other various shenanigans, both related to this book and not. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, hit the subscribe button, you know all that. Until next time, fare thee well.